My name is Ron Bales with INDOT Environmental Service Division. I will be covering INDOT public involvement updates. Kia Gillette with HNTB will be covering INDOT's COVID response, and CJ Cunningham with Troya Group will be covering INDOT decentralization. INDOT in January 2020 decentralized public involvement, which means that public involvement is now handled through the INDOT districts. The Office of Public Involvement that was at Center Office no longer exists. Since the Public Involvement Manual has not been updated since 2012, and due to emergency situations that the pandemic presented, it was determined by INDOT that the Public Involvement Manual would need to be updated. A decision was made by INDOT to have two separate manuals, one for planning, maintained by INDOT Planning Division, and one for project development, maintained by INDOT Environmental Service Division. Both manuals were available for public comment for a period of 45 days this past fall. Both manuals will be finalized and approved by Federal Highway in the coming weeks. Notification of the new manuals will be sent through listserv, and the new manuals will be posted on the INDOT website. The next couple of slides will briefly summarize these new manuals. The purpose of the INDOT Planning Public Involvement Plan is to provide information to educate the general public and stakeholder groups on participating in the transportation planning and programming processes. Provide a resource for INDOT staff and transportation planning partners. Provide information about INDOT stakeholders, the transportation planning and programming processes, public involvement tools and techniques, and why public involvement is important. The plan was developed in accordance with 23 CFR 450.210, which states that each state develop and use a documented public involvement process that will be reviewed periodically for effectiveness to ensure full and open access is provided to all interested parties. The following principles guide all INDOT planning public involvement efforts, which include early and continuous public involvement, information accessibility, involvement with traditionally underserved communities, reasonable access, conduct diversified approach, enhancing stakeholder relationships, incorporation of public comments, timely responses, and process review. The goals of public involvement in transportation planning is to provide a robust, creative, and inclusive outreach process to Hoosiers across the state, to establish trust and credibility with the public, to evaluate current and ongoing public involvement activities on a periodic basis to identify successes and areas of improvement. The Planning Public Involvement Plan also discusses program development process, such as INDOT planning documents, State Transportation Improvement Program, STIP public involvement, multimodal transportation plans, coordination, consultation, and local public agency processes. Additionally, the plan also discusses approaches to stakeholder engagement with outreach to underserved populations, public outreach, tools and techniques, measures of effectiveness, and emergency public involvement procedures. When it comes to transportation planning, where you live matters. Projects that involve local city streets or county roads are the responsibility of local city or county governments. INDOT administers funding to local municipalities for transportation improvement projects. Metropolitan planning organizations and rural or regional planning organizations supports INDOT's planning efforts. The purpose of the INDOT Project Development Public Involvement Procedures Manual is to provide policy, guidance, and instruction to those performing public involvement during the project development and delivery phases. Outlines public involvement procedures during the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA phase. Educate and raise public awareness of activities, the requirements and opportunities for participation and engagement in the transportation decision-making process. The purpose of this document is also to educate the public in understanding how public input and participation fit into the INDOT project development and delivery processes. The 2021 INDOT Project Development Public Involvement Procedures Manual provides guidance regarding ADA and Title VI, public involvement per Indiana Code, public involvement activities required during project development process, expanded public involvement criteria used during project development process, public involvement post-environmental document, expanded local public agency public involvement requirements. The 2021 INDOT Project Development Public Involvement Procedures Manual is an update to the 2012 Public Involvement Policies and Procedures Manual, and below are some of the main highlights of those changes. Decentralization of public involvement at INDOT, public involvement during emergency situations, removal of planning from the manual as now it's covered by the INDOT Planning Public Involvement Plan, changes in public involvement thresholds for requiring opportunity for public hearing, and updates to ADA and Title VI. The changes in public involvement thresholds for requiring opportunity for public hearing can be seen here in bold, which includes opportunities for public involvement when the proposal permanently alters an existing pattern, noise abatement if feasible and reasonable, environmental justice if potentially disproportionate, and permanent road closures. INDOT has transitioned to a decentralized public involvement process, whereas the Capital Program Management Division project managers are responsible for public involvement for their respective projects. The transition from a centralized to decentralized public involvement process began in January of 2020. The new Project Development Public Involvement Procedures Manual lists public involvement activities and responsibilities under the decentralized public involvement process. Please note the Office of Public Involvement is no longer a department within INDOT. There are several useful public involvement templates, manuals, guidance, and checklists available on the INDOT Public Involvement website. Here is an example of a public involvement certification checklist. This identifies all the steps needed to be completed to obtain INDOT Public Involvement certification. There are 3 phases necessary to deliver a project. As you will notice, all 3 phases have public involvement component. Both the planning and project development public involvement manuals cover these phases. Stakeholder engagement at INDOT can be communicated a variety of ways. INDOT, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and Rural Regional Planning Organization websites provide information that is useful in public involvement activities. INDOT media contacts for Central Office and the districts can be found on the below INDOT website. This includes the Strategic Communications Director and Central Office, along with district media contacts for each of the 6 INDOT districts. INDOT also has a social media presence for specific projects, INDOT districts, and INDOT themselves on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. INDOT district offices work with communities to identify needs, opportunities, and solutions to transportation challenges. Each district has their own website with contact information, and INDOT also has the Transportation Services Call Center at 855 INDOT for you. Public involvement at INDOT can be in the forms of public hearings, public information meetings, public involvement at INDOT may also include public open houses and other public engagement. Our next presenter, Kia Gillette, will be discussing INDOT's COVID response.
As Ron mentioned, my name is Kia Gillette, and I'm an environmental project manager with HNTB. I attended road school last year in 2020. There were classrooms filled with people, crowded hallways, crowded bars. We didn't know it yet, but life was about to change. It was the Friday after road school that many of us learned we would be working from home and in-person schools were canceled. And it was only 11 days after road school that Governor Holcomb issued a stay-at-home order due to the COVID-19 virus. And our lives and the projects that we work on have been different ever since. In May of 2020, INDOT published a guidance memo on COVID-19 and public involvement. It included 2 different scenarios for public involvement. Scenario 1 is for when the opportunity for a public hearing must be offered, and Scenario 2 is when a public hearing is required. Scenario 1 is for CE projects where the opportunity for a public hearing must be offered. An example might be a project where more than 1/2 acre of new right-of-way is required. So under this scenario, you must publish 2 legal notices. In these notices, you should include a statement about the opportunity to request mailed hard copies of project information or the project CE. You should offer a 15-day comment period and offer the opportunity for the public to request a hearing. It's recommended that you mail or email notices to key stakeholders and affected property owners. And you should make documents available online. For example, the CE, preliminary plans, drawings, and renderings should be posted. If you have a PowerPoint presentation that helps explain the project, that could also be posted to the website. You should coordinate with the INDOT PM and local officials on good public viewing locations for documents. And once you've completed all of these steps, you're going to want to submit your materials per the INDOT Public Involvement Certification checklist that Ron mentioned to the INDOT PM for review, and then ultimately to the INDOT Consultant Services Manager for certification. Now, Scenario 2 is when a public hearing is required. This would be for a project that involved a historic bridge or larger projects that require an EA or an EIS. For these types of projects, INDOT and Federal Highway may consider virtual options to supplement, but not to replace, in-person public involvement. For these projects, you must develop a public involvement plan proposal and submit to INDOT and Federal Highway for review. And I'm going to walk through an example with the North Split Interchange project. This is a project that was an EA, and it did require holding an in-person public hearing that we supplemented with virtual public involvement. The North Split Interchange is located where I-65 and I-70 meet at the northeast corner of downtown Indianapolis. It is the busiest interchange in the region. It was constructed in the 1960s and 70s, and the pavement and bridges do need to be replaced. There are also existing safety concerns within the project area. The project requires a complete redesign of the interchange, and all infrastructure will be replaced. The NEPA document is an EA, and it does require a public hearing. There has been substantial public interest in the project, and we also had a contractual deadline for NEPA completion in our design build contract, so we didn't have the option of waiting to see how COVID would play out. I'm now going to walk through what the public involvement plan proposal should include on the left-hand side of the slide, and then talk about how the North Split plan included and addressed those elements on the right-hand side. I want to emphasize that not all public involvement plans need to look the same. They can be tailored to each individual project. The plan must include public opportunity to review project documents in person and online. The North Split project included hard copies of the EA at 4 libraries, at the H&TB office, and on the website. Number 2, You must ensure that the public can submit comments, and this includes verbal testimony at the public hearing. We offered public testimony for verbal comments as well as comment forms at the hearing. Comments could also be submitted via the website, mailed, emailed, or called into a toll-free phone number with a voicemail. You must ensure that comments are documented. We had a court reporter transcribe verbal comments at the hearing. All written comments were documented, and we transcribed the voicemail comments that were received. You must ensure the public has access to public hearing materials. We had display boards and a presentation at the hearing, and these materials were posted on the website, as well as a virtual project office. And number 5, describe the safety protocols at the venue. For the North Split project, we did implement several COVID-related considerations, and I'll talk about those next. The first step in our COVID considerations for the North Split project was to review state and local guidelines for gathering size restrictions. The figure of Indiana to your right is from the coronavirus.in.gov website, and depending on the color of the county, there could be different size restrictions for gatherings. And at the time of the hearing, gatherings were limited to 250 people in Marion County. To address this, we did hold the presentation and had the display boards in separate rooms. We had worked with the venue for overflow rooms if we exceeded capacity in either of the presentation or display board rooms. We had 2 of the same presentation just at different times to allow for more people to attend. We placed chairs in the presentation room 6 feet apart and had a number of chairs so people could spread out. We also included 2 sets of display boards. The boards were spaced 6 feet apart. We did require face coverings. This was mentioned in the public notice and signed at the registration table. And we even had extra face coverings if somebody didn't have one and wanted to attend. We had hand sanitizer present at multiple locations throughout the rooms, and there were restrooms readily available if people needed to wash their hands. We also included some additional virtual components to supplement the in-person hearing. We held a virtual public meeting with the same presentation as the hearing, where attendees could ask questions in the chat feature. This virtual meeting was broadcast via a local channel on television, so if people did not have internet access, they could still see it on TV. In our public hearing, our virtual meeting, the broadcast, the methods of commenting were all promoted heavily via the 2 public notices, the INDOT listserv, emails to neighborhood contacts and stakeholders, an email blast to our list, multiple social media posts, the website, the news media, and we also mailed hard copies of the public notice to adjacent property owners. In addition, we developed what's called a virtual project office. And the picture you're seeing here is the entry to that virtual project office. It included the presentation, a fly-through video, and display boards, and really offered a different opportunity to people to view the same information. North Split public involvement by the numbers. We held 1 public hearing. 14 attendees signed in at the hearing. We think there may have been a few more people there that did not sign in. We had 1 virtual public meeting / Channel 16 broadcast. 57 attendees at that virtual public meeting, which is quite a bit more people than who attended the in-person hearing. We received 47 comment letters, forms, emails, and voicemails. And to date, we've had over 2,100 visits to the virtual project office. And I think if anything good can come out of this pandemic, the focus on virtual public involvement and incorporating that into future projects beyond COVID would be it. We received a lot of positive feedback from the public on the virtual meetings, and it really provides an easy way for the public to learn about a project. Next, CJ Cunningham with the Troyer Group will speak about INDOT public involvement decentralization.
Thank you, Kia. Once again, my name is CJ Cunningham, Manager of Environmental Services at the Troyer Group in Mishawaka. Troyer Group has been really fortunate to work very closely with the INDOT LaPorte District, and in doing so, we had the pleasure of conducting 4 hearings in coordination with the district and the Office of Public Involvement over the 3 years preceding decentralization. Today, I hope to share with you a case study about how we went about planning for and preparing for the first hearing amid the new decentralized procedures. The subject of today's case study is the State Road 55 at 73rd Avenue intersection improvement in the town of Merrillville, Lake County, which is in the far northwestern portion of the state. The proposed improvements involved the conversion of a signalized intersection to a roundabout. The hearing was held on October 22nd, 2020, which was about 7 months following the onset of COVID. The hearing was held at nearby Merrillville High School, which was approximately 1.5 miles from the project site. Planning for the hearing really began in earnest about 45 days before the October 22nd date, so roughly early September. Some of the initial steps included discussing dates with key staff of the LaPorte District, with key staff at Troyer Group, and reaching out to venues to just check their general availability, and if available, what dates. We were a little delayed in getting started, primarily due to COVID-19 concerns, but also just some lingering questions related to the division of responsibility among the new decentralized process. Throughout planning, we monitored the Lake County COVID-19 status and any local ordinances that may be in place. The map to the right shows the state COVID status as of early October. We coordinated the division of responsibilities with the LaPorte District. The new public involvement guidance diverts responsibilities from the prior Office of Public Involvement to the districts. So we just wanted to seek clarification on how much the district wanted to rely on us, the consultant. In this instance, they relied on us heavily, but were also working with us hand in hand throughout the planning process. Ultimately, we identified a preferred hearing venue and were able to reserve it. Critical to our public hearing planning process was a pre-hearing conference call, and this was conducted approximately 30 days before the hearing. By the time it occurred, the hearing date had already been scheduled in coordination with the key participants from Troyer Group and LaPorte District, and we had reserved the venue by now. Discussion topics during this pre-hearing conference call ranged from just general project overview all the way through speaker responsibilities. But a couple I want to touch on in particular involve the virtual participation and the detailed hearing agenda. Regarding virtual participation, we were committed to providing an opportunity for people to participate who didn't want to attend in person. So we had a lot of discussion about what medium we could use for that. Ultimately, we settled on Facebook Live that was coordinated by the district communications staff. I'll touch on that a little bit more later, but that commanded a lot of our conversation during this pre-hearing conference call. Another thing we discussed during the conference call was a request from the district to prepare a detailed hearing agenda. They just wanted to be as comfortable as possible that the Troyer Group knew what was going to occur through every step of the evening, from the open houses to the public presentation to the public comment session and how that was going to be conducted. We put that together just for their comfort that everything was planned to a T. Also critical to our public hearing planning process was a pre-hearing site visit. Ours occurred 16 days preceding the hearing, which was 1 day before the legal notices were published. However, moving ahead, I would recommend a minimum of 3 weeks before the hearing, only because your visit might reveal the need to change venues if proper social distancing can't be maintained, or maybe the capacity is not adequate. During our visit, though, we became really familiar with the space. We were able to test the AV system, again, just observe the general size, check the flow of people through the entries and exits, and it really allowed for detailed setup planning. We were able to arrive the day of the hearing knowing where everything was going to go, both within the presentation space and within the lobby spaces where the open houses were occurring. Pictured to the right is the 150-person lecture hall at Maryville High School that we were fortunate enough to have available for our public hearing. A new task on our plate was the legal notice distribution and publication. 18 to 20 days prior to the hearing, we sent certified letters among adjacent property owners and also distributed emails to local elected officials. We ran 2 legal notices, once 15 days prior to the hearing and the other 8 days prior. It's a requirement that 2 legal notices get published. The notices introduced certain COVID precautions, such as the requirement for face coverings, the need to schedule an appointment at the library to go and view the available documents, and also offering the option for virtual participation. 3 days before the public hearing, we conducted a hearing content review meeting. The purpose of this conference call was to discuss the draft PowerPoint presentation and just make some final tweaks. We wanted to cement the order of events for the evening that relates back to the detailed hearing agenda that was requested by the LaPorte District. We discussed how we wanted to handle the public comment session just to keep it on track as much as possible. And we reviewed the exhibits that were going to be made available to the public. We also just finalized responsibilities for all that would be attending from Troyer Group and LaPorte District. Who would be welcoming and greeting the public, who would be interacting with the public around the various exhibits, and then who would be speaking during the actual presentation and comment session. When the day of the hearing arrived, we started by packing up the car. We ended up bringing a lot of stuff. Some key items included the COVID kit that had the hand sanitizer, the disinfecting wipes, the extra face coverings. We even had to bring vehicular signage. Maryville High School's campus was so large that we had to have signage that directed traffic to the rear of the building where the entrance was for our presentation space. However, we felt really comfortable when it came time to set up because of the pre-hearing site visit we had conducted. We knew how we were going to attack the COVID precautions by way of placement of hand sanitizer and disinfecting wipes. We were comfortable with where we were setting up the exhibits for the open house, and we're also just very comfortable with the presentation space, including how we were going to accommodate the virtual setup as well. Pictured to the right are some signage that we prepared and posted upon entering the building. The general format of our public hearing involved 2 open houses, first preceding, then following the formal public hearing. The way we divided the presentation responsibilities was that the INDOT LaPorte District Communications Director, Adam Parkhouse, pictured to the right with the microphone, was gracious enough to act as kind of the master of ceremonies. He provided the introductory remarks and kind of set the scene for the presentation, and then handed it off to Troyer Group to provide more project detail. At the conclusion of the public presentation, Adam once again emceed, and guided the public through the public comment session. Now, I would encourage those of you working with other districts to be clear on speaking responsibilities. Adam was kind enough to be involved in our presentation, but that may vary from district to district. Troyer Group requested a hearing debrief meeting with the LaPorte district. 1 week following the hearing, we arranged a conference call that was intent on gathering input from all of the Troyer Group and INDOT staff who attended the hearing, including a Troyer Group team member who participated virtually. The main topics of discussion involved the virtual format. Again, we used Facebook Live, but a critique of this system was that it only allowed for one-way communication. We also discussed at length the audio used for the virtual participants and for the transcription. It was revealed after the hearing that those audio levels were lower than ideal, so we talked about strategies to maybe improve that in the future. Minutes were prepared and distributed and now serve as a reference point for how we can improve future hearings. So following the public hearing, there still remains a 15-day public comment period. During this time, comments were sent to Troyer Group and to the INDOT project manager. Facebook posts were not entered into the official record. However, the district communications staff did a really good job of responding to all substantive comments posted there. Responses were developed as normal in coordination with the design team, the INDOT project manager, the asset manager, and the communications staff. But the comments, or responses to the comments rather, were sent by Troyer Group as opposed to being sent by the Office of Public Involvement prior to decentralization. Some lessons learned while navigating this new process were to hold a pre-hearing kickoff meeting and to conduct a pre-hearing site visit. Completing these two tasks removed so many unknowns regarding division of responsibility and unknowns regarding the physical space for the hearing. We also learned to establish a thorough communication plan, much like you would on any INDOT design project. Identify what issues to communicate with whom and keep your communication hyper-focused. In the future, we'll definitely test out audio and video for the live stream more thoroughly, just to be sure the user experience is as great as possible. We also want to be sure to account for adequate time among the critical path below. By developing appropriate timeframes among the 4 subtasks below, you can arrive at an achievable schedule from draft CE review through final CE approval. This concludes the third and final segment of this presentation, and we will now be available for live questions and answers. Thanks everybody for your time.